defined by people who've never been here, or maybe came here for a photo opportunity to stand by the border and to try to scare people inside of this state and in the country about the folks who are coming to get us. You know the reality, and you understand the values of this community, which are the best that we have in the state of Texas. And I just got to tell you, as a lifelong El Pasoan, born and raised in another border community, I know what that's like. It takes 2 flights to get to El Paso, Texas. It's an 8-hour drive from our state capital to reach our community, or if one of us wants to go testify at a Senate or a state house hearing, we've got to put in those 8 hours, or maybe catch 2 flights in order to get there. And most of us don't do it. Who's got the time? Who has the resources? Who has the will or the way to get out there? And so our voices very often are not heard. And as Luis pointed out earlier, our votes go uncounted. This is one of the lowest voter turnout regions in America, as is my hometown of El Paso. And some will try to say that we are lazy, that we lack some kind of love for this democracy, that we don't care what happens and we deserve everything we get. But I think we know that the answer here is something quite different. When those in power or who seek positions of public trust don't show up, don't listen, don't seek to understand, don't reflect back what they have heard, we can forgive people for thinking that they're not part of the conversation and that their voice and vote may not matter at the end of the day. When we see a state that has been so voter suppressed and intimidated and gerrymandered, where those in power choose their voters instead of the other way around, it really compounds the problem here in this county and in my home county of El Paso. But I love the way Luis started us out right now, because if those are the facts today, we also have the power in this community to change it. No one coming from outside to ride to our rescue. No one's going to save the day for all of us. It is on each and every single one of us to be the answer. We looked at the numbers. In 2020, despite the best efforts of some of the folks who are here, 154,000 people in Hidalgo County who were eligible to vote, could have participated in that election, did not cast a ballot in the most consequential presidential race in our lifetimes, maybe in American history. You come to that judgment. Since then, 34,000 new voters have become eligible and have entered the roll. That's 188,000 people that we have yet to hear from in this community. When I ran for Senate in 2018, we only lost by 216,000 votes. If you put the margin of non-voters in Hidalgo and Cameron County together, if you went up to Star and included them as well, you would have what it takes to win this election. And I guarantee you, when more voters show up, you don't have the crazy extreme policies that define our state right now. A total ban on abortion, beginning at conception, with no exception for rape or incest, in a state that leads in the number of rapes committed in the United States of America, in a state where there are thousands of untested rape kits on the shelves right now, in a state, since this guy has been the governor, the clearance rate, the ability to bring people to justice has declined by half. That's not how we feel. Those are not our values. That is not what we would choose. But when we, I mean all of us, don't show up and don't persuade others that it is in their interest to show up, these are the policies we get. A permitless carry bill that allows any Texan to buy a firearm and to carry it on our streets, maybe take it into a movie theater or a college campus with no permit, no background check, no training whatsoever. Predictably, gun violence in this state has spiked. More cops, in fact, who lobbied against permitless carry have been gunned down in Texas than any other state in the union. Those aren't our values here. Whether or not we own guns, or Republicans or Democrats, we believe in a responsible tradition of gun ownership. If we showed up to vote, that would not be the law of the land today. I was just in Uvalde 2 days ago, and I was in a meeting just like this with the parents of those 19 kids, with the family members of those 2 heroic teachers who gave their lives trying to save the lives of those kids in their classrooms. And we would have forgiven them if they said, you know what, Beto, I'm checking out. No more politics for me. You all in positions of power, you the Democrats, you the Republicans, you have failed us. And I lost my kid in this. But they're not giving up. In fact, many who had never voted before led a march this Sunday, and it was fucking beautiful. Hundreds of people came out in that community. Democrats, Republicans, independents, people who've never participated in politics before, to stand up for accountability for what had just happened, and to stand up for reform to our gun laws so that we defend the Second Amendment but do a far better job of protecting the lives of our kids, our parents, our families, the people in this community. I see them having the courage and the persistence and the strength to act in the midst of this suffering. And I think, who the hell am I not to do everything I can at this moment with what I have, where I am, and with whom I'm with? That's all of us right now. This is a defining moment of truth for Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, for this country. And there are people your age, there are people my age, who 100 years from now are looking back on 2022. And they're going to say, listen, you had the most voter-suppressed state in the union, harder to cast a ballot in Texas than in any other state. You had this total abortion ban in a place that has a maternal mortality rate that rivals that of any developed country on the planet. More women are dying here, especially women of color and black women, than almost anywhere else, because as you foreclose options for an abortion, it becomes particularly hard to get a cervical cancer screening or see a family planning provider or get any kind of reproductive health care at all in the least insured state in America. They'll see what we were up against, those people of the future, and they will look back on us at this moment and say, you had the voters here in Hidalgo County, in El Paso County, and the other 252 counties in the state. You had 4 months left until the November 8th election. What did you do with yourselves and the time that you had before you? Some of you today, and I'm so damn proud of you, went out and knocked on doors and met those voters who have not participated in previous elections. You had great conversations with them about what's on the line, what's at stake, and why they need to vote, why it's in their interest, not for Beto, not for the Democratic Party, not for you, but for themselves, their families, and for the future. And I guarantee you, those voters you talk to are far more likely to participate in this election than before you knocked on their door. And listen, it's tough. You were sweating by the end of it. You lost half your body weight in perspiration. Your socks were soaked. These are awkward conversations to show up and listen to a complete stranger about one of these issues that you're not supposed to discuss in polite company, the other one being religion. And you had the courage to do that. And if we continue to do that, if we inspire one another and choose each other as the example and the model, then we're going to reach that critical number of voters, the very people who have been designed by the Republican majority and our current governor to be the ones who don't participate in our elections. We bring them in and we make them the margin of victory on the night of November 8th. I'm here right now because I believe in you. I'm here right now because I want to work with you. And as Stephanie just said, I'm here right now because I want to listen to you. So we've got 2 microphones. Cynthia Cano, who's on my team to your right, has the other microphone. You have a question, a comment, a suggestion, an idea for me on how I can be a better candidate, how we can run a better campaign. I am all ears. I want to make sure that you know that you are part of this and that you are welcome to lead this. It's the only way that we're going to win this. So Cynthia's got the microphone. If you raise your hand, she'll come over and bring that mic to you, and we'll get this conversation going.
For anybody that asks a question, we're also going to give a shirt. So Lisa's going to come and give you a shirt for asking a question.
That's right.
Hi, my name is Lucinda Garcia.
And I'm Laura Marquez.
I don't know if we need this, but we're going to use it anyway. So you mentioned in an interview during your 2018 campaign that one of the most urgent issues facing women is that the Supreme Court could effectively overturn Roe v. Wade at any moment. Due to this recent lapse and Governor Abbott's distrust in women to make their own healthcare decisions, there's almost a complete ban on abortions in Texas, as you said earlier. Even before the Supreme Court ruling, Texas led and continues to lead the nation in repeating teen pregnancy rates, so we can assume that Abbott's method of controlling women's bodies is not the answer. What is your action plan regarding restoring a woman's right to choose?
I also have a few questions. So when you do reinstate women's personal autonomy, will there be a specific time frame in which women will be able to be offered these services? And for instance, will the Texas Heartbeat Act or the Texas Heartbeat Act still be in place?
Thank you both for being here and for asking this incredibly important question. So I'm 49 years old, and as you all know, Roe versus Wade was decided 49 years ago. For the entirety of my life, for a half century, in fact, it has been the law of the land that women have bodily autonomy to make their own decisions about their own health care, their own body, their own future. And that was the law going back to 1973 when 3 Texas women, it wasn't the guys, it wasn't people from outside of the state coming to our rescue, 3 Texas women, Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, who was a Texan, and her 2 attorneys, Sarah Weddington, who came from Abilene, Texas, of all places, and Linda Coffey, who now lives in Dallas, Texas. They pled that case before an all-male Supreme Court and persuaded them that this right to privacy, to make your own personal decisions, is a right that is protected in the Constitution. And that has been the facts and the law of the land ever since. I think it was a failure of imagination on the part of many of us to ever dream of the day, it would be a nightmare, where that protection for those rights would be withdrawn. As we know from the Dobbs decision, it has, and as we know because of our current governor and the Republican majority in the state legislature, we now have a total ban on abortion. So it's not even somewhat available or limited in its availability. It begins at conception, at fertilization. And there's no exception, and I stress this because I want you to share this with your folks, with your Republican mom, with your very Catholic brother. And they say, hey, Beto, I just don't believe that abortion is the right way forward. And you might say, you know what, I hear you, and I'm not gonna try to convince you otherwise. This is a deeply personally held decision that you've made, and I wanna respect that. But did you know that if a 10-year-old girl is raped by her father, she will now be forced to carry that pregnancy to term against her will? That's the law of the land in the state of Texas right now. I think when people hear that, they say, you know what, there's probably a better solution than the one that we have. So your question is, how do we change this and make it better? The first step is winning political power. If we do not win this election for governor, we don't support other pro-choice candidates who are on the ballot right now, then this will remain the law of the land for as far as I can see. There is nothing that the president can do unilaterally that will meaningfully change this dynamic in the state of Texas. To be clear, he could do more, and we want him to, but abortion will still be denied for millions of Texas women. The only way to change this is by winning this election. There are folks who are wearing these yellow vests, they've got clipboards around here. At any point during this conversation, if you want to knock on doors, if you want to host a canvas where people follow your lead on knocking on doors, they're here to sign you up so that we can win this. So winning political power is the first thing. Second thing is to make sure that we restore these protections for these rights in the state of Texas. And I believe these are human rights. These are inalienable rights. So I don't say we need to restore the rights. The rights exist. The protections have been removed. So to restore these protections, we need to work with the political power that we win and compel and convince enough of the members of the state legislature to do the right thing. So winning state legislative seats is also incredibly important. And then lastly, remembering this. In my 49 years, I labored under the illusion that progress was inevitable and that we kind of moved in a straight line. Maybe it was too slow for my liking, but more or less, más o menos, if we were just patient, we were gonna move in the right direction. You all have heard this Martin Luther King Jr. quote that the arc of justice bends in the right direction. I'm screwing that quote up, but you know what I'm talking about. Things are just gonna get better if you'll just wait for them. That's the interpretation. That is not what Dr. King meant. He meant that we've got to pull on that arc. We've got to bring it our way. Because that victory in 1973 was not final. It was just overturned a month ago. And when we win this election, that won't be the end of the road for us either. This fight is going to be ongoing for the rest of our lives. And we got to get used to that, get that into our heads, into our hearts, and into our feet so that we're ready to knock on doors and meet voters from now until we finally and firmly secure these rights. And even then, it won't be done. So I'm just letting you know that as important as winning this next election is, and it's the critical first step, we've got to stay together afterwards and continue to mobilize public sentiment and opinion so that we force those in positions of power to do the right thing. Thank you all for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Here's our next question.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugo Sabe. So Texas is currently ranked as the 13th worst state for income inequality in the United States, and we have not improved this standing since 2015. What specific policy goals do you have in mind to create a more equitable future for Texans across all income and wealth levels?
Thank you for this question. Questions about income inequality, and I'll add to that, more people labor below a living wage in this state than any other in the union. This is a state, as you all know, where the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. Maybe not everyone's working $7.25, but they may be working $8.10, they may be working $9.30. Whatever they're being paid, it is not enough to put food on the table, keep a roof over your head, pay for the medication that keeps you alive, unless you work a second job or a third shift. School teachers, right here in this county and throughout the state of Texas, half of them on average work a second or a third job to make ends meet. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a restaurant or at a bar ordering an ice cold beer on a hot day like this one. And the person who serves that to me says, "Hey Beto, I hear you talk about teachers all the time. I'm a special ed teacher, or I'm a counselor in a high school, or I'm a librarian in an elementary school, and I work in this restaurant. I serve beer in this bar to support my habit of educating the kids in this state." So beginning with that minimum wage, we need to raise it to $15 at a minimum. That's got to be the floor below which no one will fall. That will drive wages up for everyone else, including those who are making more than $15 an hour right now. We are today what is known as a right-to-work state, which means that it's very hard for unions to organize and to bring the power of those who provide the profits and the value of these corporations and businesses to bear, for better working conditions, for better wages, for better equity in terms of what comes out of the work that they provide. If we move from right to work to right to organize and ensure that people can band together, there's going to be a lot of pressure to ensure that we have people making more wages and reduce that income inequality that we have. Last thing, this is a big one. I mentioned earlier we're the least insured state in the country. We haven't expanded Medicaid in the state of Texas, which means that we have people right here in this community unnecessarily dying of diabetes, of the flu, of curable cancers, simply because they cannot afford to see a doctor. That also drives people into medical debt. They have to sell their houses, they have to live on the streets or in their cars or in a shelter simply because they cannot afford to see a doctor. Expanding Medicaid brings $10 billion in a year to this state. We use that to hire more providers, connect more people with care, and reduce property taxes, especially for those earning at the lower end of the scale. So those are a few ideas that would address income inequality in the state of Texas. Thanks for asking.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Camila Moreno.
My name is Emma Cantu. So due to our close proximity to the border, immigration, and more specifically undocumented immigration, is a rising issue seen in South Texas, as hundreds of families are being separated and detained in migrant facilities. Due to COVID, these migrant shelters struggle to house these people due to inadequate resources and support from the state.
Since we witnessed these firsthand effects of this today, is there any assurance that this problem will be addressed? And if you're elected a governor, what is your plan of action and when we'll be able to see the results for that?
Thank you both for asking. So, like you, I live in a border community. Like you all, I see El Paso benefiting from those who've chosen us, including asylum seekers and refugees who show up with not a penny to their name. They come here to do better for themselves, to do better for their kids, and they also come here to do better for all of us, and they do. You know, El Paso, Texas, one of the safest cities in America. And I'll tell you, it's one of the safest cities, not in spite of, but because of those who've chosen America and our hometown to be in. 24% of those I live with in El Paso were born somewhere else. Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, but also in Africa and Asia and the globe over. I think it's a wonderful thing that we have, and we certainly benefit from it. So on one side of this, I see those who come to this country seeking to work. When we were visiting families during the winter freeze last February, when the grid failed, we spent some time in a field with those who were picking onions and went to the trailers in which they lived. And for the pleasure of picking the food that we depend on at the dinner table, they're willing to sacrifice and put themselves through a level of suffering that most people don't experience over the course of their lives. There are others who come to be with family members, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a daughter, or a son. And there are those who are seeking asylum and protection because if they were to return to El Salvador, or Guatemala, or Honduras, it's very likely that their child would be kidnapped or raped or killed. And as the father of 3 kids, I would do the exact same thing. I'd travel 2,000 miles by foot if I had to, atop that train they call La Bestia, if necessary, to protect and save the life of my kid. For those 3 groups, we have got to do better. I mean, this is a room, this is a community, this is a nation of immigrants who by their very presence and by their struggle and their service and their sacrifice have made us the country that we are today. We succeed when we welcome immigrants, but we've got to find a lawful and orderly way for them to come here. Our immigration laws have not been updated since Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States of America. It was before I was old enough to vote. Epic, monumental failure on our part. And I'll say it was Democrats and it was Republicans, all of whom had power at different times and failed to use it to fix this problem. Were I governor, I would gather all of us who live in these border communities together. And I'd say it does not matter, no me importa if you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent, I just could care less. But if you have ideas on how we can connect people who are coming to this country with ways that they can improve this country and this state, and there's a legal, safe, and orderly way to do it, we're gonna get it done. And we're gonna lead nationally on that. Now the other side of this are people who really do pose a threat to us. Those who want to traffic illegal drugs like fentanyl that has killed so many Americans and counting. Those who traffic in human beings and modern day slavery. We have to be completely intolerant against that and vigilant to make sure that we apprehend those who are causing this level of suffering and misery. So we can do the 2 things, right? We're Texans, we understand this, we live this, we can figure it out. What we don't want is the political circus being led by our governor at the border. Putting migrants on buses to Washington, D.C., I don't know what that accomplishes. Involuntarily activating 10,000 members of the Guard. These Guard members had to leave their families, their jobs, their kids with 7 days notice and be deployed at the border for a year. 4 of them have killed themselves so far since they've been on this deployment. 3 others have died in accidental deaths. None of that loss of life was necessary. We don't need to be doing this right now. We need solutions. We do not need stunts. And those solutions, when I'm governor, are gonna come from communities like these. I started out by saying this is a part of Texas so misunderstood by those in power who fail to come here and listen to those who live it. And so that's part of the reason that I'm here, part of the reason that I'm listening, and you'll continue to see me back as governor so that we really have solutions at the end of the day. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Here's our next question.
Hi, I'm Santiago Martinez. I have a question about the STAR test. If you are elected, will you stop the STAR test?
Yes. Santiago, thank you. I'm impressed that you're here. Thank you for asking the question. Let me just expand on this briefly. There's not a teacher, there's not an educator, there's not a parent I've met who does not believe in assessment or accountability or testing. We may or may not like those tests, but tests are important. But a STAR test, this high stakes, high pressure test, which will determine the future and fate of that teacher, of her principal, of that school district, which in no way measures the potential inside of that child, or perhaps the struggle that educators had connecting with him or her after 2 years of pandemic, 2 years of learning loss. And a test which many teachers feel like they are forced to prepare for not hours or days, but weeks and months. So many young people that I've talked to and listened to, including my 3 kids who are in public schools in El Paso, have said, you know what, we're not doing the things that I can tell my teacher really wants to do because we've got to prepare for this standardized test. I would replace it, Santiago, with something more like a diagnostic that maybe you do a couple of times over the course of the year and you do not prepare for. Just a way to check in and find out where the needs are and where resources need to be sent. Not a punitive tool that punishes schools or teachers or withdraws resources from those who really need it. In fact, Texas is one of the only states that requires a high-stakes, high-pressure standardized test in order to graduate from high school. We don't need that additional pressure right now. As I listen to educators, they tell me, Beto, right now I'm trying to keep my kids alive. I'm trying to make sure that they're okay after the trauma that they have experienced these last 2 years. They've lost their grandparents to COVID in some cases. Their folks may have lost their jobs. They may have lost their home. These teachers are telling me, I just want to make sure that they're okay and that I'm able to deliver for them. Let me focus on that first, Beto, and then we will get to these other things. So we're going to make sure that we listen to you, to parents, to educators about what replaces the STAR test. But yes, if I were governor right now, I would have canceled it for this year. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it, Santiago.
Hi, my name's Michaela. I think I'm just going to start off with some context. So I'm an RGB native, born and raised, and over the years I feel like there's just this huge idea that in order to achieve a life worth living, a quality of life, the goal is to leave the RGB. And in regards to healthcare, to education, I've had friends and family over the years who travel to Houston on a weekly basis by car. That's 6 hours there, 6 hours back. So much time, so much money, so much effort just to receive proper treatment for whatever cancer they may be diagnosed with. I have friends who will always say, I want to leave the RGB for school. That's the only way I will get proper education. I do not want to stay here. And I think as I've grown and matured, I have learned that there actually is a lot of promise and there's hope here in my home. And so my question is, what's your plan to allocate funds to healthcare to help our community who suffers from the highest rates of heart disease, of diabetes, and to help our school systems implement more strategic plans to educate our community and our children?
Wow. I'm so grateful for this question, and it hits really close to home. A few nights ago, we got into Dallas pretty late, and we were trying to find a restaurant that was open. And there's this chain of restaurants. It was the only one that was open near a hotel. We didn't have a car. We had to walk over. It's a place called Saltgrass Steakhouse. And we got there. Cynthia called ahead, and she said, how late are you serving? And they said, if you get here by 9:55, we'll make sure that you get some food. And we got there at like 9:53. Excited. We got seated at a booth. Server comes up to me, and he recognizes me. He says, you're Beto. I said, I am. He said, I'm from El Paso, just like you are. And we strike up this conversation, and he says, to your point, he says, Beto, I've got 2 degrees, but I make more serving tables at the Saltgrass Steakhouse, and on the weekends, driving Uber. And he called both of them side jobs or side hustles. I make more on these side hustles here than I could in El Paso with a full-time job for what I've been educated to do. He said, I want to go back there. I love that town. My mom is there. It's where I was raised. I mean, those are my people, but I'm here. I'm stuck here. How do we change this? It was the same question asked in a different way. And the reason this hits so close to home is I mentioned I'm raising these 3 kids with my wife, Amy. Our oldest, Ulysses, 15 years old. His sister, Molly, 14. Henry's 11. They're out of the house in just a few years. We hope. We'll see what happens. And will they choose to stay in El Paso? Or if they leave for a little while to come back? Or will they find opportunities somewhere else? And this community, not the wealthiest community in the world, right? That sometimes struggles to come up with the tax dollars to pay for K through 12 education, but is invested in those 3 kids and every other child. We've invested in the museums, the quality of life, healthcare. We have a new 4-year medical school, and the community came together to help fund that, right? But after all that investment, if they go take that somewhere else, and that other community, whether it's Dallas or Houston or Tokyo or Paris, wherever it is, they'll benefit from those kids and our investment and their potential and their genius, right? And not our hometowns that deserve that reinvestment. Here are a couple of ideas to address your question. Another time, Cynthia and I and Chris were traveling together. We were in Pecos County, small county, rural serving county, and we learned about a program where if you go to medical school but can't afford it, Pecos County would pay for your medical school tuition on condition that you come back and practice medicine in Pecos County for 6 years. And the kicker was, the guy that I met, this guy Alden Velasquez, who had benefited from that program, he was in his 8th year back in Fort Stockton in Pecos County. He wasn't going anywhere. He wanted to be back, right? And so for the cheap price of a medical school education, they returned one of their own who put down roots, and he was raising his kids there right now. So as governor, I would seek to work with you and others to find out what the in-demand professions are that people cannot afford the education for and may go somewhere else or may never receive the education. Look at the composition of our medical schools across this state. It doesn't very often look like this room right here, right now. If we remove debt and student loans as an obstacle for people to pursue a medical career or a career in education, or one of those careers that we want to see more of right here in this community, we're going to grow our own and keep our own right here. But you also ask another important question. How does the state use its extraordinary resources, and Texas is the 9th largest economy on the planet, to make sure that all of us are benefiting in every region of the state? I believe this is the last major part of the state that does not have a major highway system linking it to the rest of the highway systems, right? We just got our big loop highway system in El Paso completed in the last couple of years. This is another thing that we have in common. As governor, I'm going to appoint people to positions like TxDOT commissioner from this region who can make sure that they bring back resources to this region. I'm going to work with our state university systems to make sure that they're investing in the kind of academic opportunities, whether it's medical school, dental school, or other high skill, high value, high wage occupations and professions that people have to now leave the RGV to go pursue somewhere else. And we know that when people leave, there's a good chance they're going to stay in that other place and not come back home. I want this to be an easy decision for people who are raised here to stay here or to come back here. So I'm looking forward to partnering with you, because I must you from outside or dictate from Austin how this is going to happen. You're going to come up with this, I'm going to partner with you, and we're going to get it done. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
First of all, thank you so much for coming. Texas is one of 15 states that do not require sexual education, with 25% of school districts in Texas not offering it. And in 2021, the Texas legislature passed a bill requiring sexual education to be on an opt-in basis in Texas public schools, effectively cutting sexual education access to many children in school districts that do offer it. Texas also stresses an abstinence-only approach in sex ed curriculum. This is despite many studies proving that sexual education in schools decreases ST rates, teen pregnancy, and domestic violence. What is your stance regarding sexual education in public schools, and how do you plan to implement it into the Texas public school curriculum?
Michael, thanks for the question. This is pretty important, and it's one of these things that's not an abstraction, it's not an academic exercise. Our state leads the nation in teen pregnancy, it leads the nation in repeat teen pregnancy. When you put that together with the maternal mortality rate that is particularly deadly for women of color in this state, I think we understand why having this level of education in our public schools is so important. And I hope it also comes with how we treat one another in intimate relationships. You know, there was no education like that when I was a young man, when I was a boy growing up in El Paso. And my dad's version of the talk about sex was opening this drawer in his office that he had in the basement that was full of condoms. And he kind of looked at it, made sure that I saw it, and then he shut it. He said, I have no idea how many are in here, okay? And that was it. That's not a great education, right? Amy and I are trying to do a better job with our kids as parents, because of course, that's the first and most important responsibility in teaching our kids about intimacy and about sex and about the dangers, but also the joys and the opportunities and the ways in which we can connect with one another, right? It's a powerful, tough conversation to have. And again, father of three, we've had those conversations. They're not easy, but they're important. But we need to be able to do this in a way through our public schools that seeks to protect the public health of all Texans. I also mentioned that statistic on rape earlier. The way that people can learn how to protect themselves and how to seek justice and how to make sure they can go to somebody to ensure that there's accountability and follow through and justice at the end of the day. I want to make sure that we are protecting especially the most vulnerable among us. And we can do a lot more through our public schools. So again, this is an issue where I'm going to be looking to you and other young people who are now experiencing and living this so far, listening to educators and classroom teachers, and most importantly, parents. I think it's going to take all of us coming together to make these decisions together. Thanks for raising the question. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Brianna. As you mentioned, voter suppression is a really prominent issue, and throughout the last presidential election, Houston, the most populated city in Texas, and one of the most diverse, had limited voting stations, especially in regards to the population, which was obviously a calculated move. They limited a lot of culturally diverse people from voting. So what do you plan on doing to get more voter accessibility the next time around?
I love that you provided the context for this because, it's not random that they targeted Houston, Texas. It's the largest city. It has more voters in it than the entire state of Nevada, right? And it's the most diverse city, not just in Texas, but in the United States of America. I think they speak something like 124 different languages within the Houston Independent School District. That's the way voter suppression has always worked. And folks, the party I happen to belong to, the Democratic Party, in the first part of the 20th century, it was the Democrats who mastered the art of voter suppression. In 1923, the Democratic-controlled state legislature in Texas outlawed voting by black Texans. It wasn't an inference. It wasn't how many jelly beans are in the jar. It wasn't recite the Texas Constitution. It literally said in black and white that African Americans could not vote in our elections. It was a law of the land for more than 20 years in this state. You had annual voter re-registration. You had poll taxes. You had literacy tests. You had all these ways that those in power sought to disenfranchise those who had no power. It's just now a different party is trying to perfect that science again. I mentioned gerrymandering earlier. Well, the gerrymandering is a racial and ethnic gerrymandering. If you're black or brown, those in power, who happen to be Republicans, will try to cram you into a district to minimize the power of your vote. And some people logically say, you know what? The hell with this. If my vote does not count for as much as that other person in that other district, why should I bother at all? When you have one ballot drop-off location for Houston, Texas, which you just mentioned earlier, in the middle of a pandemic that's killed more than 90,000 people, again, people said, you know what? Do I want to risk my life driving clear across town to stand in a line to drop off my ballot in that drop-off box? Probably not. Outside of Texas Southern University, one of our great historically black colleges, the line to vote was 6 hours long. Who has 6 hours? You got to work that next job. You got to take care of your kids or your folks. You just don't want the indignity of standing in that line, and you don't do that either. So when you see us having one of the lowest levels of voter turnout in America, that's the explanation, the voter suppression that you just described. And let's be very clear about who it's targeted at. It is young people, it is brown people, it is black people, and it is very old people and people with now disabilities who have to prove their identity over and over again. And if they need an assistant to help them cast that ballot, that person has to do the same. People understandably give up. So here's how we change that. One, we make sure that people can get on the rolls and register to vote without a big hassle. We're here to help you. If anybody is not registered, you can get registered to vote right now. But for a lot of Texans, without having somebody at a table or who's a volunteer deputy registrar, it's pretty tough because you cannot register online. So we change that by opening up online voter registration. We extend that with same-day voter registration. You show up at the polling place on November 8th, you just realize that you're not registered to vote or you've changed location. I want to make sure that you can register right there on the spot. And then add to that automatic voter registration. You turn 18 or you become naturalized as a citizen to this country, boom, you're on the rolls, no questions asked. you are ready to go. Those things exist in other states, but they don't here in Texas. And last one, imagine if we replaced the state holiday of Confederate Heroes Day with Election Day as a state holiday. Everybody gets work and school off to be able to vote. That might help us out as well. Thanks for that.
Hi, I'm Gigi, and this is my twin sister Jackie. We had a couple questions for you, sir. So as you may know, the leading cause of deaths kids school age to 19 is gun violence. So really what myself and I'm sure a lot of people here are wondering is, what is your plan to stop out gun violence in Texas? Hi, Mr. Beto. I have a brother who's 14 and starting high school next year. After Uvalde, the fear and panic of the reality that it can happen anywhere, a shooting in any school, affected me greatly. As governor, I'll be trusting you with his life. I have two sisters as well, and my mother. After the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I fear for their lives as well as my own. As governor, I will trust you with their lives. While I do trust my family in your very capable hands, what are some things you intend to do to make sure you keep the promises that you make?
Thank you. Jackie, Gigi, thank you for being here and for asking the questions. So, on this first issue of gun violence, and especially in our schools, again, hits close to home. The El Paso Independent School District, which all three of my kids attend schools in, first day of school is in 18 days. And since the slaughter, the massacre in Uvalde, nothing has changed in terms of state laws or protections. You know, after 23 of my neighbors were killed in El Paso in August of 2019, and they were killed because their skin was brown, because the shooter had been told by this governor and our former president there was an invasion coming. And the shooter posted online that he came to repel the invasion of Hispanics. We're going to politically take over this country and this state and replace him as a white man. It shows up with a military-grade weapon that is perfectly legal to buy in the state of Texas. Shows up with all the armor and the gear and the rounds and the high-capacity magazines and kills completely innocent people. After Santa Fe High School, after Sutherland Springs, after similar massacres in Midland, Odessa, and other communities, this governor has not only not done anything to protect the lives of those in our lives, he's made it easier, as we talked about earlier, through permitless carry, for anyone, including violent criminals, to have guns on our streets. So my job, should you place me in this position of public trust, is to make sure that we continue to defend the Second Amendment. We're a state that has a long, proud tradition of doing that, but also do a far better job of protecting the lives of those in our communities. Some things where I think there's a lot of common ground are background checks. We don't have universal background checks in this state. Others do. Why is that important? 8 people were killed in Midland, Odessa in 2019, a month after the 23 killed in El Paso. The gunman in Midland, Odessa went to a federally licensed arms dealer to try to purchase an AR-15. Couldn't pass the background check that that person had to impose. And so because we don't have a universal one, he was able to buy directly from a private seller. Literally like buy out of the trunk of his car, take that weapon and just start slaughtering innocent people. A red flag law is something that I think would help save lives. That gunman who killed 23 people in El Paso, when he ordered that AK-47, when it came in, his mom called the police. She said, I have no idea what my son needs with this, and I'm really worried about what he's gonna do with it. They said, I'm sorry, ma'am, nothing we can do to help you. Good luck, you're on your own. Perfectly legal what he's doing. A red flag law simply says, if someone is exhibiting disturbing behavior, if they're even saying that they may want to go kill somebody in their classroom or at work or in a Walmart like this guy did in El Paso, we are able to intervene and remove that firearm from the household until we can determine that that person is going to be safe and is no longer a danger to themselves or to someone else. Safe storage, which just simply says if you've got kids in the household, keep those guns locked up. How often do you read or see a story about a child who discovers their parent's firearm in the glove box at home in a drawer and accidentally shoots himself or kills their baby sister? Happens all the time. And then sometimes they take those guns into schools and they kill their fellow classmates, as happened at Santa Fe High School in 2018. So those three ideas, universal background checks, red flag laws, safe storage laws, the vast majority of gun owners, as well as non-gun owners, Republicans and Democrats agree on. I think as governor, we can get that passed. I also happen to believe, and you should know this from me, that I don't think anyone should have an AR-15 or an AK-47. Those were designed for use on a battlefield. That high impact, high velocity round, when it hits your body, it just destroys everything inside. Your organs, the soft tissue, the blood vessels, the arteries. You bleed out as designed before anybody can revive you and save your life. Those kids, just think about those 19 kids, one of whom could only be identified by the shoes that she was wearing because there was nothing identifiable left above her shoulders, right? That's what an AR-15 does to somebody. Now, on a battlefield against our enemy, get after it. In our streets, in our schools, in our movie theaters, in our shopping centers, I just don't think we should have them. So those are the proposals I have. I think we can find common ground on much of what I just described. But again, as with your other question about protecting women to be able to make their own decisions about their own bodies, we can have great proposals. We can propose wonderful legislation. If we do not mobilize our friends, family, neighbors, classmates, and colleagues to apply the pressure necessary on those in power, we might very well not be able to get all of this done. So I'm counting on all of us, myself, yourselves included, to win this election. I'm counting on all of us going forward to continue to win the day on these issues. But that's my plan to address these issues. Thank you for asking. Appreciate it.
My name is Zach Borja. I am an RGV native and a proud member of the LGBTQ community here in the Rio Grande Valley. So my question is, after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Clarence Thomas stated that SCOTUS has a duty to correct the error of previous rulings that address contraception and same-sex marriage. Immediately after, Ken Paxton said he defended the sodomy law. If the Supreme Court revisits said rulings, and the Texas GOP's new platform calls gay people and trans youth abnormal. As a result, Texas has become an even more hostile and dangerous place for LGBTQ people here in Texas. As governor, what would you do to protect the human rights of over 1 million LGBTQ Texans?
You're right, this consenting opinion or concurring opinion from Justice Thomas talks about contraception, talks about marriage equality, and also talks about same-sex intimacy. You mentioned the sodomy laws that are, I think, still on the book or could be reintroduced here in the state of Texas that would outlaw intimate relations between people in this state. And you kind of think, you know, could that really happen? Well, maybe a few years ago we thought, could they really outlaw abortion completely with no exception for rape or incest? And yet here we are today. They're telling us very clearly and plainly what the plan is. And Texas, unfortunately, under this Republican control and leadership, and Greg Abbott as governor, has been the laboratory for the most extreme and hateful and fringe ideas anywhere in America right now. In fact, you all probably know this, but he's ordered state agencies to pursue the parents of transgender kids, accuse them of child abuse, and if that accusation is investigated and sustained, to take those kids from their loving parents, as well as every other child in the household, and turn them over to Child Protective Services, the worst run foster care program in the United States of America, bar none. 100 kids in CPS custody and care have died since the year 2020. You know, right now there's a decent chance that they are sleeping in the offices of CPS because they don't have enough beds or families that can take them in. Because one of the things that you can do in Texas that is legal is you can deny adoption to a family based on the fact that they're gay or a member of the LGBTQ community. So these questions keep coming up. What are we going to do to change this? One, we have to win political power. There's no court in the land, including the highest court, as you just shared with us, that is going to save the day at the end of the day. There's no amount of executive power that the current president has that's going to fix this. The Supreme Court has said we're sending all of this stuff back to the states, and we are the state where more people, 30 million face these dangers than any other. So we've got to win these elections. We've got to restore protections for these rights that we now recognize as Americans. In some cases we have for decades. But it begins with this election. And again, for those who are holding the clipboards and the yellow vests at the back, you can visit with them if any of these issues matters to you and you want to win this election. It's not going to happen because of anything that I do alone, or my political party does, or this campaign does. It's what we all do as people by talking to others who have the power to decide the outcome of this election. So the issues that you brought up are super important to me. As governor, I'm going to veto the bad stuff coming down the pike, like the Don't Say Gay bill that is being proposed for the 2023 legislative session. And then I want to restore protections and rights that maybe far too many of us have taken for granted in the past. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
So many great questions. I wish I could get to everybody, but I'm going to be able to do 3 more.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Kendra Rodriguez, and I have a plan in relation to your abortion plan. You say that your plan is to get a bunch of pro-choice seats in the House, but what happens if we're not able to do that? A lot of women are resorting to at-home abortion pills, or Plan B or Plan C pills, but since it's illegal to get abortions, it's very hard to access those online and to even get them to your home legally without encrypting yourself. So it comes down to my really big question: are you willing to provide legal protection to those women? Because it is private and they're privately ordering these medications because that's what they are at the end of the day. Are you willing to compromise with pro-life people in the House? Are you willing, what bills are you planning on proposing so that we can get some of those rights or protections back? Because I don't know.
Thank you. Yeah. This is such a good question because when we look at the political landscape right now, we see that those who are pro-choice are 9 seats down in the state house. And so winning at least 9 seats, or enough seats to provide enough pressure and leverage on the majority to at least come to the table so that we can move forward and get past the place that we're in is critically important. Electing a native of the RGV who's running for Attorney General, Rochelle Garza, is going to be super helpful. You just mentioned legal protections. And what the Attorney General of the state of Texas chooses to pursue or not to pursue, and who they choose to protect or not to protect, is incredibly important right now. We have an Attorney General who is pursuing transgender children and their parents right now. That is a decision that man made, supported by our current governor. Imagine if we could turn that around and protect the most vulnerable, as you are describing right now. The short answer is, I'll do everything within the executive authority and power of the office of the governor to protect women in this state, to make their own decisions, again, about their own future, their own body, and their own health care. I will work with anyone, anytime, because you mentioned, how much are you willing to compromise or achieve consensus on? I'll work with anyone, anytime, anywhere, to make sure that we make progress. I won't allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. In other words, I don't want to come back here and speak to you as governor and say, I made absolutely no progress because we stood simply on principle and refused to negotiate or see anything from the other side. We absolutely have to make progress. But I'll tell you this, if the first pro-choice gubernatorial candidate to win the office of the governor in 32 years wins on the night of November 8th, it is going to send shock waves through this system. If these horrific abortion bans in large part originated in the state of Texas, I think we'll go back to the days of Jane Roe and Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey and show that the strength and power of the state is in its women, who showed up in record numbers to determine the outcome of this election. And those state legislators, more than they care about anything else, they care about their own re-election. And if they feel that that is jeopardized by being on the wrong side of this issue after that election, I think we get them at the table and we're able to make progress. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Angela. I have 2 questions or concerns. The first one is mental health. That's a big thing. I know suicide rates in Texas are really high, especially in teens. And I just want to know what's something that you want to do to help improve that. The second thing is something I know a lot of us appreciate about you is that you come out and you visit the communities and you're really you're social with everyone and you hear everyone out. do you want to continue doing that once you're governor and once you win? Like, is that something you plan on continuing to do? And those are like my 2 questions.
Great. Thank you for being here. Let me address your second question first, because I think it's connected to everything else that we want to achieve. So right now, and I'm grateful to you and all of you for coming out. Youth for Beto group, the Hidalgo County Young Democrats, others put the word out, and you responded, and you came to us. It's also really important for those who want to serve this community to go out to those who might not have heard of this, might not have the luxury of taking time off from work or school or whatever their responsibilities are, and show up for them. So I keep mentioning knocking on doors. That's one way that we can do it. Another way, I know we have representatives of Lupe here, following Lupe's lead and going out to colonias and meeting with people who tell me things I wouldn't have known otherwise. A little colonia not too far from here, residents told me, hey, Beto, I pay taxes every year just like you do. I follow the laws just like you do. I try to keep my nose clean just like you do. But why has my street never been paved in the 20 years that I'm here? How come there's not a single street light on this block? How come when it rains even just a little bit, it floods 3 feet and I can't even get into my house and I see rats swimming by? Nobody should be forced to live that way in what we describe to ourselves and the rest of the world as the first world. People deserve that respect and dignity, but I don't think they're going to get it if those who are seeking these positions of power and public trust don't show up for them first and listen to them and understand these issues. Meeting those residents along with Cynthia at that colonia changed me and made them a priority for me. The injustice that I saw and the outrage that I felt has got to be converted into action to make their lives better. And so I'm going to make sure that we do that. And so I've challenged my team, in addition to doing events like these, in addition to knocking on doors individually, one voter at a time, which I love to do, let's find communities that aren't often represented or reflected. And again, it does not matter to me citizenship, does not matter to me political party, does not matter to me wealth. It just matters that you live in Texas and you stake your future here. I want to make sure that I'm listening to you and incorporating your ideas. Remind me the theme of your first question.
Mental health.
I just learned this number the other day. I thought we were 50th in the nation in mental health care access. We're 51st in the nation. I don't know who the 51 are. The 50 states, is it plus Washington, D.C.? Maybe that's it. Is it Puerto Rico? Is it somewhere else? We're 51st. What that means is that in this county and throughout the state of Texas, the #1 provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. And I've been at meetings like these where people will stand up and they'll say, hey, Beto, my brother, who has diagnosed schizophrenia, tries to get arrested on purpose by a sheriff's deputy to go to the jail where he'll at least be afforded a bed, a roof over his head, and if his conditions and symptoms are bad enough, maybe some psychotropic medications, if he's lucky. Same with those with clinical depression, bipolar disorder. There are millions of our fellow Texans who have mental health care challenges because we failed to expand Medicaid and invest in mental health care, get no help at all. Some are living on the streets, buying drugs on the streets because that's the only way that they can medicate right now. So as governor, in addition to expanding Medicaid and bringing those $10 billion in a year that we'll also put into mental health care access, we've got to acknowledge that will be wholly insufficient for the challenge we have. If we're going to climb out of this basement of 51st in the country and get to first, which is my goal, we're also going to have to invest much more than we're spending right now in addition to Medicaid expansion. You might ask, where the hell is that money going to come from, right? And I think that's a good question. Your current governor has spent $6 billion just this year trying to scare you about Mexicans and others coming over the border, building a wall, involuntarily activating the guard, sending all these DPS troopers. I passed, how many, Cynthia? How many DPS troopers did we pass on the way down here?
Like 10?
At least 10 over the last hour. I would say it's probably 20 or more. The rate of tickets written by DPS troopers for residents of the RGV has gone up like 1,000% right now. What if we use those resources on things that would actually help people? Still address challenges that we have on the border, focus on solutions and not stunts, but then invest in mental health care. What if we did this? marijuana is illegal in the state of Texas right now, right? One of the last states, one of the last places on the planet that we lock people up for possession of a substance that's legal almost everywhere else. And it is overwhelmingly black and brown people who are behind bars, even though Texans of all ethnicities use marijuana at roughly the same rate. We spend $500 million a year doing that, right? And we lose out on another $500 million a year of tax revenue if we tax the legal controlled sale of marijuana in Texas. So, as governor, I want to make sure that we make marijuana legal, that we have $1 billion more, that we can invest in priorities that we have, whether it's paying school teachers their true worth, investing in mental health care, the infrastructure that we see here that is needed in the RGV, and mental health care would be at the top of my list of those. Thanks for asking the questions. Really appreciate it.
This is going to be our last question, but we are going to stay. If you all would like to take a picture or say hi, we're going to be right here. And so I know some of you have to go and you're going to volunteer at the next event. And so if you are, please let those folks line up first. And Stephanie is going to help line up the people that are going to go volunteer so they can get their picture first.
Hi, my name is Yelena Escobedo. First of all, I just want to thank you so much for being here. But my question is, given the concern of teacher shortages in public schools, how we would work with the Texas Commissioner of Education to design or revise policy that ensures every Texas classroom has a highly qualified teacher for our future generation?
Great question. We mentioned teacher pay earlier. On average, an educator in Texas is underpaid by $7,500 against the national average. So just to get to average, not best or highest paid in the nation, we're $7,500 down. So I'd start there. Money is not everything, but it's pretty important for teachers who are working a second and third job to support themselves right now. I just want them working one job, and that's focusing on the children in that classroom. If you're a counselor, focusing on those students that you can help out. Or if you're a librarian, making sure those kids have access to the reading and learning that's going to allow them to live to their full potential. I also want to make sure that we treat teachers with the respect that they've earned and that they deserve. These CRT bills, this critical race theory, which I've never heard the phrase before last year because it is not taught in our elementary or middle or high schools in the state of Texas. It's one of these distractions or boogeymen that the governor wants you to worry about. What we end up doing is telling history and social studies teachers what they can and cannot teach instead of trusting them. They have the education, which they paid for out of their own pocket, very often taking on tens of thousands of dollars of debt. And you've got total non-educators now telling them what they can and cannot teach. A lot of teachers say, you know what, I'm done. I have to work 2 jobs, I get treated like dirt, I've got more and more kids entering the classroom because other teachers are leaving the profession. I give up too. Half of all Texas school teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. My 5th grader, Henry, just completed 5th grade. He didn't have a permanent classroom teacher the entire academic year. It was all substitute teachers. And we love our substitute teachers, but without having the consistency of a classroom teacher in that room, he and his classmates are losing out on what they would otherwise be able to get. So that respect that we need to treat those teachers with, the pay that we need to make sure that they have, that STAR test that we mentioned earlier, and then when they retire, making sure there's a cost of living adjustment so that they can afford their retirement. Right now, they can't. We last made a cost of living adjustment for Texas teachers in 2004. And so their grandkids who are thinking about entering the profession say, if this is how you're treating my grandfolks, if this is how my parents are treated in the classroom, maybe this is not the profession for me. So these are a few of the ways that we can address that issue. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out. Very grateful to you. We're going to hang out for a little while for anybody who wants to say hi. Thank you so much.